welcome to another episode of Iconic Freedom, the Formula. We are setting the standard for accountability and responsibility, the ownership of your choices and the consequences for those choices. Let each care for self, and all will be cared for.
It's also pretty incredible that it's the media observing this as though they had no role in making it intolerable to wear that hat. So suddenly they're going, oh my goodness, look at this. Everybody's coming out. I go, why didn't they do that before? It's because you guys were the megaphone that portrayed them as deplorables. Think about the narrative versus reality. They portrayed this segment of society as joyless, irredeemable, racist. And then you look at the UFC moment, joyous, free, and happy, not a Hitler in sight. If you were on the other side, everything in your worldview is upside down. Then you should reconsider how your worldview was nourished. Who fed you these lies? Then you join us, because the election was between two groups, one who believe the news and those who don't. And those who don't outnumber those who do. So there's really only one media narrative, and it's against reality. So the grift broke when 75 million people experienced the effects of news bias personally. A Trump supporter reads a piece about Trump supporters, and he says, that's not me. I'm not a bigot. That opened the door to question all the media. When suddenly the 75 million people experience the Gelman amnesia effect, and it sinks all media narratives. Now you have the Dems asking, why can't we have what they're having? Why don't we have a Joe Rogan? Why don't we have an Elon Musk?
And we are here once again, taking a look at some very interesting things that I have seen in the news recently that I wanted to talk about again for the podcast. And if you want to follow me on X, I am at FreedomAZ0704. Please feel free to do that. Always hit the like button and share this with your family and friends. So as we jump into this, the thing that I really wanted to, kind of illuminate with the clips this week is about this cognitive dissonance that people are having. And basically, the way that, Greg was talking about it is that moment when people have a breakthrough. We're watching the opposition basically come undone is how I like to describe it. But we're watching the cognitive dissonance that where one reality, the true reality, is there, and it breaks through whatever the fog of war, fog of misinformation, disinformation, all that shenanigans. It just kind of breaks through, and people have that moment, that epiphany of, wait, what? What did we just find out? And I think it's always an interesting thing to revisit this, and especially right now, and to be able to see it. People don't always understand that moment for themselves of, when did I start to have a transformation where I started taking accountability and responsibility, or that I started to understand what those terms meant? Quite a bit, on social media, I mentioned that there is no accountability if there are no consequences. When people are having a cognitive dissonance, they are trying to live within this conflict of what they have seen and what they think that they know. One of the great things, I think one of the great gifts you will ever give yourself is that freedom and liberty to be incorrect, to have not known, to have thought one thing, to have believed, to have thought, and then through your own research to know what the reality is, because now you can see it for what it is. Just as a reminder, what is reality? Reality is what is observable and consistent, and it is a part of natural law. And what's interesting is that it is lacking in emotion. So all of those situations where you see people always being emotional and all, that's, people are starting to step out of reality when they start getting emotional. Your emotions are, as we've described before, those little tiny moments within you that is just a little heads up for you to pay attention to something and to bring your awareness and attention to something. It's life, your body, your organism saying, hey, look over here, pay attention to this. And it gives you that opportunity to make a change in your life.
So, you know what? What's happening now is people are feeling good because they have literally extricated themselves from this legacy media. They've moved on to social media because they recognize that the legacy media is in with big tech, is in with the Democrat Party, and it's not doing anybody any good.
And to the judge's point there is that when people find themselves basically freeing themselves, liberating themselves from the ties that bind, they find themselves in a much happier place in life, and they're starting to see what the reality is. You can feel it, right? I mean, if over the last couple of weeks since the election, you can feel that people are relaxing into it. They're starting to realize the lies that they were told. They're starting to pay more attention to all those things, and they're starting to see the goodness in things and the generosity of spirit with other people. And they're finding their way through that cognitive dissonance. Unfortunately for the opposition, they needed to come undone. And that's what they continue to do.
It's a Morning Joe bombshell. Joe and Mika are laying down their swords, announcing how they met personally with President-elect Trump at Mar-a-Lago, saying it's time to restart communication with the man they've smeared nonstop as Hitler for the past decade.
We didn't see eye to eye on a lot of issues, and we told him so.
Joe and I realized it's time to do something different. And that starts with not only talking about Donald Trump, but also talking with him.
A lot of Democratic leaders we've talked to this past week, since the election, have told Mika and me it's time for a new approach.
We know this will be a consequential presidency. The question is whether it will be constructive.
Don't be mistaken. We're not here to defend or normalize Donald Trump.
But boy, oh boy, did Joe and Mika stir up a beehive of angry liberals, some who were vowing to boycott. One top account says, F Joe and Mika, F Morning Joe. A current MSNBC host saying, normalizing Trump's a bad idea, period. And Keith Olbermann's threatening anyone who goes on the liberal network by comparing them to Nazi collaborators. As for The View, well, Sonny isn't so sunny about the whole thing.
I don't think you need to sit down for 90 minutes at Mar-a-Lago and kiss his ring to be able to speak truth and to be able to cover a story. So maybe they're not journalists in the true sense. Maybe they're saying that they're opinion journalists. But we have to remember that Trump is the guy who ushered in the era of fake news.
Ooh. Greg.
The piece that I want to take away from all of that, so you've probably seen all these things. If you're a person that is on various social media, you probably saw these clips or something similar to it. What is the motivation of Joe and Mika? I don't know. I mean, over time, we're going to see. We can, guess. We can have some sort of conjecture. But at this moment, we can't get into their crazy and try to figure out what's going on in that brain of theirs. They're both very emotional people. And as a result, whenever they're talking, especially when they were talking about President Trump, they're not in reality. They're not able to speak about it. And the piece that keeps getting highlighted is that, and it did across a bunch of different shows this entire week, from once they finally released that video, was that you're sitting there yelling and screaming about this man, the former president, now president-elect, and that he's Hitler, he's a fascist, and he's a Nazi, and all this other stuff. And now you're saying, oh, erase, none of that really matters. It's like, well, this is the cognitive dissonance that these people are living in, that they're experiencing on a 24-hour basis. I mean, imagine if you were a person that did not have order in your life, that did not have clear-headedness, and that you only lived in your emotions. You would not be able to see the beauty of this life. You would not be able to experience how wonderful this life is and the interactions that you can have with humanity, because your brain is mush, basically. I mean, you're constantly in a state of hypervigilance, and whether you recognize it or not, you're always looking for somebody to offend you, right? Because you want somebody to play into the psychodrama that you've created for yourself, that you think is the reality, when in fact it is not. But it was interesting to listen to them. They're very condescending. If you go back and listen to that clip again, there's like, oh, and we told him so. It's like, really? You're talking to the President of the United States, and you told him, did you? I mean, that kind of arrogance is pretty remarkable. But I will say that when people get like that, it is from a great deal of insecurity, and insecurity in so many ways. A lot of ways is that they don't, they're afraid that people are going to find out who they truly are, right? And they already think themselves kind of a, how else would I say this? They think themselves as a fraud, right? And so they're afraid people are going to figure that out. So they get defensive, and they also realize that they have no way out. They feel painted in a corner, and they've said all these things for so long. Now what do you say? And people are angry at them because those people were just as stupid that they listened to them and they believed, here we go again, they believed what was said instead of, doing the Amber Rose theory that we've talked about, right? Is do your own research, right? Earn the reward of satisfaction by knowing the reality. Don't just take what somebody says, as what the reality is. Don't take what I say. Do your own research and see if, in fact, it's true, whatever is being said.
On screen. Sonny, you have a legal note.
I do have a legal note. Thank you, Whoopi. Matt Gaetz has long denied all allegations, calling the claims, quote, invented, and saying in a statement to ABC News that this false smear following a 3-year criminal investigation should be viewed with great skepticism. That DOJ investigation was closed with no charges being brought.
We'll be right back.
So what I like about that particular clip is it's doing something that is being obligated now, which is holding people accountable. With regard to the previous moment, there was an interaction where that particular person, Sunny, and I can't remember her last name, she made an accusation to Matt Gaetz, who was being nominated as the Attorney General. And she didn't have any evidence. And in fact, you can research the story and you'll find out everything that the DOJ actually never filed charges against Matt Gaetz. And the person that was involved with it went to prison, I think, for 11 years. They were caught lying and extortion and all this other shenanigans. Okay, but the piece I really want to talk about is that she had to retract and she had to clarify, because the people in the media, like we just saw with Mika and Joe, and now the people on The View, and you're going to start seeing it unraveling, basically coming undone everywhere that you look, because they can't just toss out these emotional Molotov cocktails anymore, making accusations without consequence. So then I mentioned at the beginning of this that there is no accountability if there is no consequence. So that has to be experienced in order for there to be a satisfaction. And whenever somebody is not taking responsibility, in effect, they're obligating someone else to take the responsibility. I definitely want to spend a moment of the podcast on this because it's a piece of the puzzle in life, in looking and understanding how things work, basically. And I would say one of my dad's favorite topics of discussion growing up was about natural law. Again, it's observable and it's consistent. And you can see that whenever someone, again, is not taking responsibility, then they're obligating it to someone else. If someone is not paying their debt, they are obligating the debt to somebody else. Essentially, it is not a consequence-free life. There's always going to be the person that is owed and the person that is responsible and accountable. And if that person does not take ownership of their responsibility and be accountable, then they lay that at somebody else's feet. So I just want to repeat all of that because this is super important. Whenever someone is not taking responsibility, in effect, they are obligating that to someone else to take it. The law of nature basically is that responsibility has to be had. It's like we talk about reality will always reveal itself. It will have its way. It will have its day. And the same is true about the responsibility of the individual. If a person is not in consciousness that they are putting this on to others, then what's happening is they are whimsically going through their life, just doing whatever they want and thinking they have a consequence-free life. Like, oh yeah, see, it doesn't matter. But the reality is it always matters. Every choice you make, every move you make, every breath you take, it always matters. It's always impacting someone. It's always impacting life. It's always impacting nature in some way. And either you take ownership of that choice or you lay it at the feet of other people. So a great example might be recently the current president was trying to buy votes, basically, by paying off everyone's loans, their debt for their loans, for their school loans. Well, you can't do that because who winds up having to pay that off? Are all the people that don't have loans or that have already, essentially have paid off their loans or they never had a loan to begin with. And that debt goes on to the backs of the American people and the American people for generations to come, because we're not at a point yet where we are generating enough income that we offset whatever the debt is. So these people essentially are not taking ownership and they're not being responsible. And again, I know that I keep harping on this a little bit on this particular podcast, but the epiphany in your life will move you to a place that everything that you do and say you take ownership of. If you do not, then you are forcing that onto other people. Now, if that's who you want to be in life, then that's who you want to be in life. But if it's not, if you're trying to create standards for yourself, that's why you're listening to this podcast, that you are creating standards of health where we are letting each care for self and all are cared for, and that our standards of accountability and responsibility are the foundation of how we live, then this is obligated to you, that you must take responsibility, you must have accountability of consequences in order for it to follow the natural law.
Joe and I went to Mar-a-Lago to meet personally with President-elect Trump. It was the first time we have seen him in 7 years.
Now, we talked about a lot of issues, and it's going to come as no surprise to anybody who watches this show, has watched it over the past year or over the past decade, that we didn't see eye to eye on a lot of issues, and we told him so.
What we did agree on was to restart communications. Joe and I realize it's time to do something different. And that starts with not only talking about Donald Trump, but also talking with him.
Morning Joe went to Mar-a-Lago to mend fences. Let that sink in. Obama used to be a Democrat darling, but this election ruined his rep.
But boy, Obama during this Kamala Harris administration, it changed my opinion of that guy. Boy.
Really? Did you have a high opinion of him before?
Yeah, I did. Yeah, I did, just as an intelligent person, a statesman. But watching him just straight up lie about Trump, the thing that got me was that very fine people thing, the white supremacist thing. They just kept trying to say that he was a racist, which is this thing that I think worked in like 2017.
Yeah.
You know, I think it worked back then. I don't think it works anymore. I don't think people believe it anymore. I think that we've gotten numb to all this stuff.
So as you watched that clip again, after this brief discussion about accountability, responsibility, and the laws of nature, you might have had a different take on what Joe and Mika were saying, right? Because they were sitting there making these comments, but they weren't taking any accountability and responsibility, which means they're going to lay that at the feet of someone else. And as it turns out, MSNBC is going to break off that portion of MSNBC, which is that area, that portion of their news station, and it's going to become something different. And what is the nature of that? The nature of it is someone will pay the debt. Somewhere, someone is going to pay that debt in society. And when you were listening to the piece about Joe Rogan, he was having that epiphany, watching everyone come undone, watching people lie, watching people thinking that they're going to get away with something. You will not get away with anything in reality. You will not get away with anything from nature. It will always be there. It will always have its day. It will always have its way. And each of us must be responsible. You can leave this podcast and never listen again and never think about, the things that I'm saying at this moment, but it will whisper in your ear. It will tap you on the shoulder and it will smack you across the face until you get it that you are now out of the matrix and into reality. And as much as you embrace that, you will continue to have a greater and greater experience of life, which ultimately is what everybody wants, right? Everybody wants to be happier. And of course, we are at the end of another podcast. Thank you so much for joining me this weekend. I hope you enjoyed this. This was really a lot of fun. Hey, hit that like button if you would. Share with your family and friends. You never know how it might help them in their endeavor. All the great links are down below if you want to subscribe and all that fun stuff. And let each care for self, and all will be cared for. See you next week. Happy Thanksgiving.